She didn't plan to stop. The rain had just begun, a soft mist brushing the sidewalks as Sarah hurried down Main Street, her arms full of groceries and her mind heavier than the bags she carried. Bills were late. Her son's school needed signatures. Before we begin, tell us where in the world are you watching this from? Drop your city or country in the comments below. The diner had cut her hours again. She just needed to get home. But then she saw him, an elderly man, standing alone at the crosswalk, his white cane tapping against the concrete in quiet confusion. He tilted his head toward the sound of traffic, unsure. Sarah hesitated just for a moment. Then, as if pulled by something beyond her, she stepped off her path and walked toward him. "Need a hand?" she asked gently. The man smiled, his face worn but warm. "I'd appreciate it." That's how it began. A single act of kindness on an ordinary day. She didn't know his name, didn't know his story. All she knew was that he couldn't see, and somehow she could. She could see he was alone. She could see he needed help. What she couldn't see, not yet, was the secret he carried, the one that would change both their lives forever. Sarah Miller was 34, a single mom, and a quiet warrior in a small town that didn't notice quiet people much. Her mornings started before sunrise. Lunchboxes packed, clothes laid out, coffee brewed with hope instead of cream. Her son, Max, was 9 years old and full of impossible questions she answered with half-truths and tired smiles. She worked at a local diner, waited tables, then picked up shifts cleaning offices late into the night. Her life was a patchwork of small efforts, enough to survive, never enough to rest. The divorce had been clean, legally speaking, but the loneliness it left behind was messier. Sarah never asked for help. She didn't have time to feel sorry for herself. She had a child to raise, a life to keep moving. That's why stopping that day felt strange, foreign even. But the blind man's soft gratitude had touched something inside her, something long quieted by stress and routine. Maybe kindness wasn't something you gave away. Maybe somehow it gave something back. She didn't know then that this one small gesture would open a door to something bigger, something she didn't even know she needed. His name was Mr. Henderson, polite, well-spoken, and always dressed with quiet dignity. He thanked her as they crossed the street together, and when she offered to walk him the rest of the way home, he didn't resist. His apartment was just a few blocks away, tucked above an old bookstore with creaky steps and fading paint. He invited her in for tea. She declined, but something in his voice, the steadiness, the calm, stayed with her. 2 days later, she saw him again, struggling with a bag of groceries. This time, she didn't hesitate. They talked more. His voice was like a slow-running river, calm, deliberate, full of history you couldn't see but could somehow feel. She learned he lived alone, that his eyesight had faded completely 6 years ago, and that he didn't get many visitors. He never complained. He just accepted life the way it came. Sarah began walking with him weekly, then more often. What started as assistance became companionship. She didn't realize it yet, but she had found someone who listened when no one else did. Someone who saw her in ways that required no eyes at all. Weeks passed, and their routine began to form its own quiet rhythm. Saturday mornings were spent walking to the corner cafe, where Sarah would describe the street performers and the way the autumn leaves gathered in golden piles near the curb. Mr. Henderson would listen closely, often smiling as if he could see through her words. "You paint pictures better than most artists," he told her once, and her cheeks flushed without understanding why. They shared stories, her about Max and his curious mind, him about old jazz records and how he used to walk the very same streets in younger, better-seeing days. There was something about the way he spoke, precise, thoughtful, like every word had weight. But sometimes he would trail off mid-sentence, or mention a name and quickly correct himself. Sarah chalked it up to age. Still, a sliver of curiosity began to grow. Who exactly was this man before he was blind? before he lived alone above a dusty bookstore? Something about him didn't quite add up. Not in a suspicious way, but in a mysterious one. It was like there was a part of him still hidden, waiting. One morning, as Sarah helped Mr. Henderson sort through old mail, a small photograph slipped from the pile. It landed face up on the table, a black and white image of a younger man standing beside a grand piano, his fingers mid-motion, a crowd blurred in the background. "Is that you?" she asked, picking it up carefully. Mr. Henderson paused. Too long. Then he smiled, but the smile was brittle. "A long time ago," he replied softly, reaching to slide the photo aside. Sarah studied the man in the picture again. The eyes were sharp, confident, alive with purpose. Nothing like the humble, quiet man she'd come to know. "You were a musician?" she asked gently. He nodded once. "Among other things." That was all he said. But Sarah noticed the shift, the way his hands trembled slightly after touching the photo, the way his posture sagged, just a bit. Something inside her stirred. She didn't want to pry, but part of her knew. This man had lived a life no one here knew about. A life that mattered. And whatever it was he was hiding, it wasn't small. Sarah's son, Max, had heard about Mr. Henderson in passing, the man his mom helped sometimes. One Saturday, when she couldn't find a sitter, she brought Max along. At first, he stayed quiet, clutching his sketchbook like a shield. Mr. Henderson greeted him with a soft, "You must be Max," and Max blinked in surprise. "How did you know?" The old man smiled. "You walk like someone who loves to draw." Max softened. That afternoon, the three of them sat on a bench by the river. Sarah described the scene aloud. Ducks waddling, clouds drifting, sun glinting off the water. While Max sketched and Mr. Henderson listened with a faint smile. It was strange, beautiful even, how easily the three fit together. The silence between them never felt empty. Sarah found herself opening up in ways she hadn't in years. About her fears, her hopes, her memories of music her father used to play when life still had rhythm. And Mr. Henderson listened, really listened, as though her words mattered. She didn't realize it yet, but he wasn't just guiding her with wisdom. He was healing something in her she'd long given up on. With each passing week, Sarah noticed little things. Mr. Henderson's apartment, though modest, was always tidy. Too tidy for someone blind. The books on his shelves were alphabetized. A plant near the window was rotated just enough to catch the right light. Once, he adjusted the volume on the radio before she could even tell it was too loud. "Habit," he'd say with a shrug. But something about it didn't quite sit right. Then came the quotes. He spoke in lines that sounded too polished, too familiar, as if lifted from novels or speeches. "You've got a library in your head," she teased once. "Maybe," he replied. "I spent most of my life in words." Another time, when Max played a melody on a toy keyboard, Mr. Henderson paused and named the key F major. Sarah stared. "You still hear notes?" He only nodded. There was something about him that felt curated, like a man living behind carefully drawn curtains. She wasn't afraid, but she was curious. And that curiosity, once awakened, wouldn't go back to sleep. One afternoon, Sarah brought Mr. Henderson some soup, a simple gesture on a cold day. As she poured it into a bowl, he excused himself to the restroom. While waiting, she noticed an old chest partially hidden beneath a blanket in the corner of the room. She wasn't nosy by nature, but something about it drew her in. The latch was undone. Inside, stacked neatly, were dozens of yellowed envelopes, faded concert programs, and sheet music. Handwritten, delicate, signed with the name Edward H. Tucked between them was a black folder marked in gold. Carnegie Hall, 1987. Sarah's breath caught. She closed the chest just as Mr. Henderson returned. He didn't mention anything, but his smile didn't quite reach his eyes. That night, after putting Max to bed, she lay awake, heart restless. Who was Edward H? Was it him? What had he left behind, and why? The pieces were starting to gather, and something inside her whispered that the story she'd stepped into was much bigger than she ever imagined. A few days later, Sarah stopped by the bookstore below Mr. Henderson's apartment. The owner, a soft-spoken woman named Elaine, had known him for years. Over casual conversation, Sarah mentioned the name Edward H. and the folder. Elaine's eyes widened slightly. "He never told you?" Sarah blinked. "Told me what?" Elaine hesitated, lowering her voice. "That man upstairs used to fill symphony halls. Before the accident." The words hit like a quiet storm. "What accident?" Elaine shook her head. "He doesn't talk about it. But yes, he was someone once. Pianist, a brilliant one. Toured Europe. Played everywhere. Then one night something happened. After that, he vanished. No press. No concerts. Just silence." Sarah felt her chest tighten. She thanked Elaine and left, her mind buzzing. The man she'd walked across the street. The man who helped Max find melodies. The man who quoted literature like breathing. He had once been a name people applauded for. And now he lived in silence, invisible to a world that used to watch him with awe. When Sarah next visited Mr. Henderson, she didn't mention what she'd learned. Instead, she watched him differently. Not with suspicion, with reverence. His fingers resting gently on the armrest. His calm voice. The silence that surrounded him now felt less like quiet and more like something sacred. She wondered how he had survived the fall from spotlight to shadow. How he kept moving forward without bitterness. As Max played on the floor beside them, she finally asked a question, but not the one she meant to. "Do you miss music?" He didn't answer at first. Then, in a voice just above a whisper, he said, "I never left it. I just stopped playing it out loud." That night, Sarah cried. Not because she pitied him, but because she understood. Sometimes the greatest pain is not what we lose, but what we continue to carry in silence. She knew then that the truth was his to share when he was ready. Until then, she would simply show up, as she always had, offering nothing more than presence, and the safety to be seen. It was Max who brought music back into the room. One rainy afternoon, he found an old keyboard at a yard sale and carried it up to Mr. Henderson's apartment. "Can I play something for you?" he asked shyly. Mr. Henderson smiled and nodded. The notes were clumsy at first, but they filled the silence like light filtering through curtains. As Max played, Mr. Henderson's fingers twitched. Not by accident, but memory. After a pause, he reached forward, touching the keys. His hands knew where to go, even without sight. Sarah watched as he played a gentle melody, something familiar yet unplaceable. The music filled the room, delicate and aching. When he finished, he didn't say a word. Neither did Sarah. She just looked at him, her eyes holding the questions she didn't yet know how to ask. A few days later, Mr. Henderson handed Sarah a folded letter. "Would you read this aloud for me?" he asked. The paper was old, edges curled with time. Sarah opened it carefully. It was addressed to someone named Elise. The letter spoke of regret, of music abandoned, of a man who once had a gift and lost his way. "I don't know if you'll ever forgive me," it read, "but I still hear your voice in every note." Sarah's voice cracked reading it. She looked up. "Who is she?" He exhaled slowly. "The only person who ever saw me before I became this." The silence between them deepened. She didn't push. She just folded the letter back, placed it in his hand, and rested hers over his for a long, quiet moment. On impulse, Sarah visited a music shop near the edge of town. She had remembered something Mr. Henderson once said about an old recording studio by the lake. Inside the shop, the owner recognized the name Edward Henderson immediately. "He was a genius," he said. "The kind of pianist that made your soul feel like it had wings." Sarah asked what happened. The man hesitated. "After the accident, he disappeared. I didn't want sympathy. Didn't want anyone to see him fall. He handed her a vinyl sleeve. It had Mr. Henderson's younger face on the cover, eyes closed, fingers suspended above ivory keys. "I keep it for the memories," he said. "No one plays like that anymore." Sarah left with the record in her hands and a new understanding in her heart. This man hadn't just lost his sight. He had walked away from a world that adored him, choosing silence over pity. The next time they met, Sarah placed the record on the table. Mr. Henderson didn't react at first. Then, his fingers found the sleeve, tracing the edges, resting on his younger self's face. "You found it," he said quietly. She didn't say yes. She didn't need to. He sat still for a while and then began to speak. About the night of the accident, the crash, the darkness, the months of anger, the concerts he canceled, the people he pushed away, and the music he buried in grief. "I thought losing my sight meant losing who I was," he whispered. "So I disappeared. I thought it would be easier than letting people see me broken." Sarah reached across the table and took his hand. "You were never broken, just lost." That night, as they walked home, Max tugged on Sarah's sleeve. "He's not just a man," he said. "He's like a book with pages people forgot to read." Sarah looked at her son, stunned by his words. "You think so?" Max nodded. "And I think he still has one more chapter left." Those words echoed in her heart long after Max fell asleep. The blind man they'd once helped across the street had become family, and now, maybe, it was time to help him see something else. Not with eyes, but with courage. A return. A beginning. A stage he never thought he'd stand on again. It came in the form of an envelope, cream-colored, elegant, tucked beneath Mr. Henderson's door. Inside was a simple note. "We're hosting a local benefit concert. Would you consider joining us for one piece, even if only to listen?" Sarah had suggested it weeks ago to the community center, never expecting they'd respond. When she gave the envelope to Mr. Henderson, he held it for a long time, fingers tracing the paper. "I haven't been near a piano in years," he murmured. "Maybe it's time," she said softly. "Not for them. For you." That night he sat in silence for hours. No music, no conversation. Just the weight of a decision only he could make. And as the stars appeared one by one, something shifted in his heart. Not regret, not nostalgia, something lighter. Hope. The old church was quiet when they arrived. Dust floated in beams of light. A grand piano sat at the front, untouched. Mr. Henderson stepped forward slowly, Sarah and Max behind him. His fingers trembled as they reached for the keys, then stopped. He took a breath and sat down. The bench creaked beneath him. His hands hovered for a moment, then pressed softly. A single note rang out, followed by another. Then a melody formed, slow, hesitant, but undeniably his. Max sat wide-eyed, and Sarah's hands clutched her chest. The music grew richer, fuller, like something awakening from sleep. In that room, time bent. There was no past, no accident, no fame lost. There was only the present, the music, and the man who had once walked away from it all, now returning with grace. The night of the concert, the hall buzzed with energy. Locals, musicians, and a few old faces from the past came together. Sarah stood backstage with Mr. Henderson, who wore a dark suit and a quiet expression. "Are you ready?" she asked. He nodded. Not for applause, but for peace. When his name was announced, the room fell into reverent silence. He walked slowly, guided only by the tap of his cane. As he reached the piano, someone whispered, "That's him." And then, silence again. He began to play, not perfectly but beautifully. The music told his story. The rise, the fall, the darkness, the light. And when it ended, the applause came like thunder. He stood, bowed gently, and smiled, not for the crowd, but for Sarah and Max, the ones who saw him before the world remembered. Weeks later, life found its new rhythm. Sarah's shifts were lighter. The diner owner had been there that night and quietly offered her better hours. Max started piano lessons, always keeping a sketchpad nearby. And Mr. Henderson? He didn't go back to fame. He didn't need to. He played small recitals, taught a few students, and met Sarah and Max every Sunday for tea and music. The bond between them had deepened into something unshakable. Love didn't always wear the shape of romance. Sometimes it looked like loyalty, like quiet breakfasts, like shared silence and the echo of piano notes. Sarah had helped a blind man cross the street. What she didn't realize was he had helped her cross something too, a threshold between surviving and truly living. One evening, Sarah stood at the same corner where it all began. The crosswalk, the breeze, the sound of distant cars. Max was beside her, humming a tune Mr. Henderson had taught him. She looked up at the sky and smiled. How strange that life could change from something so small. Kind word, a helping hand, and a man with eyes that didn't see but a heart that never stopped watching. She thought of all the stories that lived quietly inside people, the ones they never told, the ones waiting to be heard. Some people passed by them every day, never knowing the greatness sitting in quiet rooms. "Mom," Max said, tugging her sleeve, "do you think we'll ever find someone like him again?" Sarah looked down, her eyes soft. "Maybe, or maybe one day, we'll be someone like him." And as they walked on, the wind carried with it a quiet truth, that behind every stranger, there's a story. And sometimes, kindness is the only key that can unlock it.